Well, good evening. It's an honor to be here. I also did want to add that Sheila Toll did a lot of the really stylistic work on this.
Yes.
So here we go. This is our pilot. We're calling our talk Democracy in America, Understanding and Responding to Challenges. Informed and active citizens are democracy's greatest assets. So, as many of you know, the League was founded in 1920, right at the same time that the 19th Amendment was passed. It celebrated, it's now 105 years since the amendment was passed. And our League was founded in 1936. We have about 400 members. This is our esteemed board of directors. And as we heard a little bit earlier, we are a nonpartisan organization, which really means we don't support candidates or political parties, but we're always out there talking, educating, and advocating around issues that are important to all of us. So with that, let's move on to the evening's topic. So American democracy has often been referred to as the Great Experiment, albeit an experiment that has been going on for nearly 250 years. At the time it was birthed, democracies were historically rare, mostly because governments in which the power lies with the people are especially vulnerable to subversion, both from within and from abroad. Today, there's considerable talk about whether that American experiment is failing. There's survey evidence that many of us believe that we are the greatest danger to ourselves. What that really means is that the instability within our democracy is a bigger threat to our country than our external foes. Hold it down a little. Okay, is this better? Can you all hear me still? Okay, sorry. So what's happened to bring us to a point in time where one of the greatest experiments on earth, one of the greatest experiments ever, is on shaky ground? So let's just take a minute to get some, to see where we are in the audience. I was just hoping we could ask maybe a few of you to share one or two words about how you're feeling about the state of democracy. And we're going to make it short, so maybe just a few of you. Really, what is it that brought you here today to hear about a talk on the state of democracy? Anybody want to?
Anxious.
Yes?
Insecure.
Insecure. Okay. Anyone else?
Scared.
Scared. Anxious.
In jeopardy.
In jeopardy. Great. Okay. Anybody else really have a word they need to share? Anger. Okay. Fragile. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, with that in mind, let's move on to answer the question, what is happening that we are at a point where we hear claims on a daily basis that democracy is at risk, or that this or that is unconstitutional? And the answer to the question is an awful lot is happening. We've arrived actually at an important teaching moment in our history, where understanding how our democracy works is perhaps more relevant to each of us personally than at any other point in our lifetimes. And our purpose today here is to both educate and to advocate. And we're doing this by creating this forum for discussion, and we're going to focus on the facts about the topic so that we can truly understand what kind of advocacy is going to be the most impactful. So we have three overarching questions that are going to guide our discussion tonight. What is American democracy? How does the use of executive action challenge American democracy? And what can and should we do to respond? So let's start our discussion with a more precise definition of American democracy. Because although our system of government is often called a democracy, the United States government is more accurately described as a constitutional federal republic. So I'm going to take these one at a time. So constitutional. Our government is based upon a constitutional. This is the foundational document that establishes its structure and framework, and it is, in effect, the supreme law of the land. Federal. power is shared between the national government, which represents all of us, and state and local governments, which represent subgroups of us. And finally, it's a republic. And another word for a republic is a representative democracy. And so that means, in effect, that we exercise our political power through elected representatives, right? We're not all sitting in Congress making laws. We've given that power to other people to do this on our behalf. The Constitution is at the heart of our American democracy, and its mission statement, which is captured here in the preamble, has been summarized by some as simple as the creation of a union that is just, peaceful, good, and free. Just, peaceful, good, and free. All three branches of government, in some form or another, swear allegiance to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's important, however, to understand what was happening at the time this document was written, because it was written at our time when our forefathers wanted a strong and unified government, but at the same time, they were wary. They needed to avoid the experience that the colonies had, in which the King of England, George III, and his powerful parliament trampled individual freedoms. And so, as a result, our Constitution is not only the source of all government powers, but it also establishes limitations on those powers. So what they did was they wanted to create a government with enough power to act on the national level, but not so much power that the fundamental rights of individuals would be infringed. So the system is designed to ensure a delicate balance between freedom and restraint. So we're going to look at a couple of quick features of the Constitution and see how that balance is demonstrated. So first is power distribution and checks and balances. And this is done to prevent any single branch from becoming too dominant. So we have three co-equal branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. We have distinct but broad powers assigned to each. And we have a system of checks and balances. And powers not assigned to any of the three are reserved either to the states or to the people. So an example of the distribution of powers is in Article 1 of the Constitution. States have the responsibility for overseeing federal elections. These things are you hearing how important these things are? The second feature is to protect individual rights. So this was to safeguard citizens against government overreach. And this is what we see in the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights guarantees such fundamental freedoms, right? Freedom of speech, religion, assembly, due process. We also have the rule of law. This means that it's a set of rules that apply to everyone, including those in power. So government actions are subject to legal constraints. And finally, we have an amendment process, which allows us to adjust our Constitution over time, right, to respond to changes in society. But in order to prevent arbitrary changes, it's a really onerous process to ratify a new amendment. So I just want to mention, you'll find several of our rights, and matter of fact, our right to vote, those appear not in the body of the Constitution, but in the amendments. Okay, that's where that right sits. The fact that it is such a difficult process to ratify the Constitution is reflected in the fact that it's only been amended 27 times in over 200 years. So we come to our second question, which is, what are the challenges facing American democracy? And the answer is that there are many challenges facing American democracy, but we are choosing to focus today on the specific challenges posed by the use of executive power and the limits on that executive power. We're going to discuss the more general process of creating and responding to executive orders. And then we're going to focus specifically on 2 executive orders. One related to the freezing of federal funds or impoundment. And the second one is the deportation of foreign citizens without due process. So we will discuss those, and there'll be time in the Q&A if you are interested in other topics that the League is active on with respect to challenges to democracy, voter suppression, money in politics, other things of that order. But we'll focus right now on the executive orders. So what's important to understand about an executive order, which is a written directive signed by the president that orders the government to take specific actions. It is an effective way to carry out policy while staying within the rule of the law, especially when confronted with a deadlocked Congress. So this is a way a president can sort of move his agenda without relying on things going through Congress. It's been used by every single American president. And the most prolific user was a Democrat named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had an average of over 300 executive orders for every year he was in office. But we can also see here that Biden and Trump, they issue them. So that's just a little look at what they did between January and March in their respective terms. But let's discuss in greater detail the limitations on the executive orders. So a government it's the order of the government to take actions, but it does not have the power of law. So in using executive orders, the president cannot order the government to take actions that aren't authorized by the Constitution or that violate existing federal laws. And the president cannot assume powers that have been delegated to other branches of government. So, for example, Congress is invested with the power to write federal laws and statutes to control matters related to taxation, related to spending, and certain war powers. What's happening?
That's the hand washing machine.
Oh, okay. And then the judiciary is vested with the power to invalidate certain laws as unconstitutional or constitutional. And the president does not have any authority to do that. He cannot invalidate a law. So there have been calls on Congress. What can Congress do in the face of these? So first of all, the president does not need congressional approval to issue executive orders. He is doing something he is allowed to do, and Congress doesn't have the authority to overturn those executive orders. But what it can do is it can pass legislation that reverses an executive order. And in order to do that, it's got to make sure it has people that will vote that in. And then when the president vetoes it, it has to make sure it has the 2/3 majority required to overturn that veto. Okay, that's how that would happen. It can also rely on its power of the purse to make the implementation of an executive order very difficult. Well, if you want this, you need to give me that, this bargaining back and forth. So these are things that Congress can do. But what's possible in theory is not always likely in reality, right? Congress currently lacks the incentive to respond in ways that are available to it through the Constitution because they don't have enough votes to write a bill, much less the supermajority, to overcome a veto by the president. So it's also important to know that the phenomenon of a president overstepping his authority while his party in Congress appears to be acquiescent is not unique to Trump or to Republicans. So just keep that in mind. Biden issued orders that were later deemed to be beyond his constitutional authority, and yet the Democrats did not stop him. So let's go on to what other options. So here we have, Sorry, I'm having a problem. Okay, so here's the reality, right? The president he has bare majorities in both chambers. And the other thing is that the full impact of the recently issued executive orders has yet to be felt by the public. We're feeling it more and more as more people are impacted by more and more executive orders. Public pressure to reverse an executive order is just beginning, but that is part of the democratic process, that it will take time for things to be felt and then for people to express their frustration that might compel a representative to change his or her mind. So let's look at the other branch of government. While Congress may choose not to act, the judiciary cannot opt out. If a case comes before the judiciary that questions the president's authority, it must examine the merits. Now, what's important is, in order to trigger judicial review, a plaintiff with standing must file a lawsuit claiming that this order either violates the Constitution or existing law, and that this particular plaintiff has suffered or will suffer harm as a result of the order. So that's why people will go to the ACLU and make the case, and the ACLU will represent them, but the ACLU needs the plaintiff in order to even have standing. But when these go to the courts, they can be overturned, right? These federal orders can be overturned because they're not supported by existing law or the Constitution. So the judiciary offers the most direct and expeditious mechanism for overturning executive orders, right? It's the most effective, more effective than Congress. So, and to be quite honest, the reality is the courts are addressing the scope and constitutionality of President Trump's authority to issue certain executive orders. And many of these will be revoked. Many may be appealed to the Supreme Court. But keep in mind, Supreme Court decisions are not immune from politics and never have been. So the conservative majority has also dealt setbacks to the Biden's executive orders. And I'll close my part of the presentation by, we've been just keeping track of the number of cases. So as of April 18th, there were 201 cases against executive actions, which are a bit broader than orders. Actions are just anything, a memo the president issues, any act of the president. And these are the areas, right, the various topics that these orders are addressing and the number of cases. And over there are some of the groups that are bringing these cases: nonprofits, states' attorney generals, secretaries of state, cities, universities, school districts. These are the people that are bringing the cases that are currently in the courts, these 201 cases as of April 18th.
Gina does have the Constitution right handy. So, thank you, Gina. To illustrate the process of legal debate about executive power, we have chosen two cases. And I will present a quite brief overview of the two cases and issues and debates. I am an educated league member, but I am not an attorney. So there are either of these cases we could talk about for hours. But for more in-depth information, we do recommend the website Just Security, which Gina just mentioned. And you can Google Just Security Litigation Tracker and access all kinds of current information on all of these cases. So the first case is about the power of the purse and whether a president can impound funds already voted by Congress. The Constitution is clear that Congress has the right to determine the budget. In Article 1, Section 9, the Appropriations Clause, as well as Section 7, the Revenue Clause, this is clearly stated. The 1974 Impoundment Control Act addresses the procedure by which a president must review any withholdings of funds that have already been voted by Congress. And this is something that is being practiced a lot now, and I believe will be practiced more as we move forward. It's one of the reasons we chose this case. So the case we've chosen is the State of New York et al. Versus Trump et al. It was filed on January 28th in Rhode Island before Judge John J. McConnell, Jr. The case was filed by 22 attorneys general, these are the states, and it was in response to 7 different executive orders and a directive from the Office of Management and Budget based on those orders. And the directive halted all federal financial assistance. And it says, this is one of the quotes, federal agencies must temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities that may be implicated by the executive orders. Well, that was in the executive order. And so the 22 state attorneys general sought preliminary and permanent injunctions against the enforcement of the policy. So these are the violations, and again, we could talk about these in great detail, but the Administrative Procurement Act is one which is a check upon administrators whose zeal might otherwise have carried them to excesses not contemplated in legislation creating their offices. This violates the, so claimed, the separation of powers, usurping the legislative function and the U.S. Constitution, Article 1. Also the spending clause, which I mentioned, and there are several others, the presentiment, appropriations, and the take care clauses. So it wasn't just one clause that was the plaintiffs claimed were violated. So I'm going to give the arguments, a very brief synopsis of the arguments for and against, because this is a league thing, is pros and cons. So the argument for stronger executive action on funding is what's known as the unitary executive theory. And this has been talked about a lot more this spring since President Trump has come in. And the belief is that there's a need to increase the president's control over the administrative state. And the Constitution's language, which is often looked at, is that the executive power shall be vested in a president who should take care that the laws passed by Congress be faithfully executed. And that it's also been said that judges in Congress shouldn't be allowed to control the executive's power. Now, this is a belief system. I think it has something to do with more efficient government. And some have argued that the checks and balances is inefficient and out of date. The con, on the other hand, as Gina said, is that Congress would be subordinate rather than equal to the executive branch, and that constitutional checks and balances are needed. So that's a quick sum. So the current status, we're skipping a lot here, and what we decided to do, because so much changes so often, is really just look at what the most recent steps have been. So as of March 6th, a preliminary injunction was granted in which the defendants, which is the government, were enjoined from in any way impeding the disbursement of appropriated federal funds to the states. On March 10th, the defendants, the government, filed an appeal to the First Circuit, and on March 26th, the First Circuit denied the defendant request. On April 4th, Judge McConnell held that the government, so basically Judge McConnell's original opinion held in the First Circuit. But on April 4th, Judge McConnell also held that the government was not in compliance with this order. That's where it stands, but the question is, who's going to file next and what will it look like? So I think we're hoping this will help you read the newspaper better. So I'm going to go on to the second case, and this is one we originally had a second case about Doge, but we decided that this topic was of the moment. So this is about due process and deportation, and it focuses on the presidential proclamation. It wasn't an executive order, it was a proclamation of March 15th purporting to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to allow for summary removal of alleged members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang. The act, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, grants the president power to detain and remove foreign citizens of a hostile nation or government when there is a declared war. So I think you all probably know the sequence of events. So another piece of background is about the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which contains the Due Process Clause, which ensures fair treatment by the government. And this clause prevents the government, both federal and state respectively, from depriving individuals of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And this means that the government must follow established procedures and provide fair notice and an opportunity to be heard before taking actions that affect these fundamental rights. So this is the case information, the one we're focusing on. And we realize there are quite a few, but we're trying to just follow one. So it's JGG versus Trump, filed in the District of Columbia on March 15th before Judge James Boasberg as a class action lawsuit that the Alien Enemies Act does not apply to the rapid deportation of Venezuelan nationals alleged to be part of the Tren de Aragua gang, and that there was no notice or due process for them. So I do want to say, just as a note, that yes, there are several lawsuits going on at this moment. And there's one that we will talk about that the Supreme Court recently ruled on, but that has been a direct outgrowth about the Alien Enemies Act. So this is not the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. It's not about birthright citizenship or citizen protesters. So anyway, the plaintiffs were specific Venezuelans who are listed by initials. This is, again, so there are plaintiffs. The attorneys for the plaintiffs are from the ACLU and Democracy Forward. Okay, let me go forward here. So the arguments, which are really about the use of the Alien Enemies Act. So the pro, which is in favor of the Venezuelan plaintiffs, is that the Alien Enemies Act is to be used only when there is a declared war and the rapid deportation did not allow for due process for the plaintiffs. The con, which is the government's argument, is that this is a question of national security. That the executive should have full power over these decisions. The Tren de Aragua gang constitutes an invasion, and this involves state secrets. And I want to say a word about state secrets. So the defendant's invocation of the state secrets privilege, it is one which permits the government to prevent disclosure of information when that disclosure would harm national security interests. And how that gets interpreted is, a key debate at the moment. Okay, so there have been many actions on this case. I think you all know that Judge Boasberg filed a TRO came up with the opinion of a TRO, immediate 5 minutes after the folks were sent off to El Salvador. So the more recent decisions, and this does involve the Supreme Court. So on the 7th of April, the Supreme Court decision 5-4 vacated Boasberg's restraining order on the grounds that it should be brought as a habeas corpus case in the court district in which the defendants had been. Habeas corpus means have the body. However, in the same decision, there was 9-0 support for judicial review of the constitutionality of the AEA, as well as also for due process notice and hearing. It was a very interesting case to read, I would say. Just last week, Judge Boasberg, I don't know whether it was as much an order, but it was an opinion that the government was in criminal contempt in this. So that's quite a statement. I could read a little more of what the decision said, but in the interest of time, we're going to move forward. And then, surprisingly, at 1 a.m. early morning this past Saturday, the Supreme Court came up with a 7-2 opinion order, per curiam order, that prevented the putative class from being deported in the AARP et al. Versus Trump et al. Case. So it isn't about the retired people. The AARP is the group of people who are in the district in which the subsequent habeas corpus case was pursued. There are now 3 or 4 different districts. And my understanding is that the ACLU was literally, flying between districts that afternoon in order to prevent, and the government also had moved this group of people from the southern Texas to the northern district of Texas because there wasn't a lawsuit in that court. I think we have yet to hear exactly what the Supreme Court will say about the merits of the Alien Enemies Act. That is something that really does need to be decided, and we'll see how quickly it is. So I am going to now hand this over to Katie.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to talk about what you can do so that you don't feel so discouraged. The court cases are one way that an individual and an organization and the courts can put a check on presidential power. The other way is you as an individual can join an established organization or work on your own. The preamble of the Constitution clearly states, "We the people of the United States." We are the ultimate check on the abuse of power, and it is understood that we are part of a healthy democracy and that we have to be involved. So joining the League is one way to take action. As I said, the League has been working to preserve and expand democracy since 1920. Although it is nonpartisan and does not endorse a specific candidate or political party, it has consistently worked to educate voters and advocate on a variety of issues, including money in politics and voting rights. The League responds in real time. They just sent out that notice about we are in crisis. They keep us informed. It sends out alerts to its members and provides clear, comprehensive, and verified information about what is happening and how the League is responding. Defending Democracy is our 2024-2025 issue of emphasis. Members of the League, we meet once a month, and a lot of times it's to share what information we know, to comfort each other. I think it's Timothy Snyder said one of the great antidotes to tyranny is community. I don't know if he said that, but I know that and joy and anything that can help us. Okay, I want to say that he did. There's also on the League website, You can find, I should be switching us over here. Obviously, one of the issues is the SAVE Act. And the reason that is so important is because it maintains the power in the people. If this vote goes through, if the SAVE Act is passed, there are a bunch of people who are going to lose the right to vote, or it's going to be much harder for them to vote. So it is really antithetical to the idea of a functioning democracy. That I already said. That QR code will get you to a toolkit, which is really wonderful, and there are some over there. It provides the names of organizations that are doing work. It provides, I was just on there today, it has little graphics that you can use to upload on Instagram and Facebook, which I don't really use and but it was cool, and they're already there for you right away. I'd probably just do a screenshot and send it to someone, but but it's really, really helpful. And once again, you can trust that everything on the website is nonpartisan and is verified. And that is, I've come to see it as a hub for reliable information. It's something that I can direct to other people and know that I am giving them unbiased information. There are other organizations that are also dedicated to protecting and expanding democracy. Find the organizations that speak to you. You can be in more than one. Find out what aligns with your passions, with your concerns. There is strength in community, and there's comfort in community. You can also take action on your own. It is easy to think that your individual action won't make a difference. But as Edmund Burke, the 18th century philosopher, said, nobody makes a greater mistake than he who does nothing because he could only do a little. The first step in taking action is to be informed. Find sources of information that are reliable and digestible for you. The League is a great source. I really like Heather Cox Richardson. She's a historian. She presents it in the context of American history. You can get her as audio, you can get her as a visual on YouTube, and you can read a newsletter. Find things that make sense to you. And also look at both sides of the issue. The more you hear what other people are saying, the more equipped you are to have a conversation with someone and to have them feel that their side is present or understood or at least acknowledged. Call or write your Congress people, and write especially senators, who I believe have a greater responsibility to a larger swath of the community. I really recommend, I call regularly. It makes me feel powerful, even if, sometimes I'm probably a 20-year-old, and I'm like, hi, I'm Katie from San Diego. And I think it's just terrible but usually, honestly, I start with a compliment. And I'll say, Tom Tillis, let's say in that example, I saw him defending Ukraine on the Senate floor. I know that was a really challenging move for him and required a tremendous amount of courage. I'm really grateful for that. Could he consider doing this? Could he make sure he votes for the SAVE Act? On his website, I also look on the website. On his website, he said he's dedicated to providing a free country for the young people of North Carolina. And I'll say, if you really want to do that, then that's what you need to do. Another thing, North Carolina has terrible problems with floods. It still has it. And if FEMA is being removed, then you can talk to them about that. Try to make the issue as detailed and personal as possible when you make the call. Remind them why they became a senator. Remind them that they have power. Be consistent and do something that makes you feel powerful and hopeful. Find whatever works for you. We all have much more power than we realize, and the power is something that builds and grows as you use it. It's easy to feel anxious about the state of the country and all the changes that are taking place. Look for comfort in community, knowledge, and action. When Gina was asking what we feel about it, and we all said anxious, I'm actually feeling incredibly hopeful and incredibly powerful. When I watch these protests, when I hear people speak and face power head on and say, no, you can't do that. That's not right. When we stand up for someone like Kilmara Abrego Garcia, and we say, we all deserve due process. There's something really comforting and powerful and makes me incredibly proud about being an American. And even though there is so much that's scary, we do have power. Don't forget that. And then we have a little quote, and make it a routine so that you don't have to think about it. And again, I would say every action is important. Every single action is important because you don't know what is going to change the tide. You don't know what's going to resonate with someone. So keep doing it. And here's the QR code for the toolkit. And we wanted to end with a little quote. Democracy is never a final achievement. It is a call to an untiring effort, by John F. Kennedy. Thank you.
Wow, we came in right on time.
Okay, so one of our questions is, what event or courses of actions would determine that we are not a constitutional federal republic anymore, but a dictatorial state?
Okay, do we have a, well, I think that, defying Supreme Court order does it for me. I'm getting some nods. Where is the exact line? But, obviously the National League feels that we're in a constitutional crisis. And I think that point where, Trump brought in the El Salvador president and, just said no, that for me certainly really did it. Do you have any thoughts
So
on?
just another question expands on that. So if the government is not in compliance or in contempt, what does that mean? What is the next step? Does someone go to jail? Are there any real consequences?
Well, I do think you're seeing a buildup of contempt declarations. So, but I did attend a meeting recently on Friday where it was an ACLU meeting, and they said the court of public opinion is very important in all of this too. So I think that, it's, parts of the government, parts of the judiciary saying there's contempt, but what is public opinion? And, quite honestly, we all tend to travel in bubbles, with people who think the same way. And so I think that's, I think that's one of the reasons you have to think about what are both sides thinking. Yeah.
So one of the things that they have said that can happen is ultimately these are government lawyers that are going to the courts, and if they can be held in contempt of court, and they can ultimately lose their legal licenses. So we will see if it gets to that point how far people are willing to go in support of policies that have been declared unconstitutional or illegal. So the personal costs will get higher and higher.
Thank you. We also had a couple of questions about calling senators. And we all know we can call the California senators. Katie mentioned calling in other states. Do they not ask you for your address?
No, if you go onto the senator's website, go to office locations, call the Washington, D.C. number, and they usually, a lot of times you'll have to leave a message, sometimes someone answers, but they'll take it from anyone.
But
they say
they ask where you're from, though.
A lot of times they don't, because sometimes it's an answering machine. They'll say, give us everything if you want to get a return. I don't assume I'm going to get a return, but I just call and say, I'm Katie Alexander from San Diego, but they don't require it.
I've heard, I do the 5 calls in.
Right.
And I've heard that they don't tally it unless you've
Right.
stayed.
Yes, that's my understanding as
Right.
well.
Right. And I know it's a lot harder to get through on, for the House of Representatives people, because you have to have, especially if you're gonna be sending an email or a letter, you have to have the zip code of that district to get anything even through online.
Cease might have a comment on this.
Yeah, I saw Angus King, he's from Maine, and he was being interviewed by Heather Cox Richardson, and they were talking about this issue. And they do rank things coming through. So he did say the highest things that they rank are emails. And in the emails is not just to say, to thank them,
Right.
to acknowledge them, but to tell how this is affecting you personally. They like the narrative stories. It's affecting me because I am not able to call my Social Security office, and I stood out in line for 4 hours, and I'm 81 years old. Those are the kind of things that they want. They want those narrative stories, they want them in email, and how they affect you. Because a lot of people are calling up bitching about everything. And that doesn't go anywhere. But these personal stories, they can go back and retell these stories. So that was just a heads up for the two of them to listen to them.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that because the video doesn't pick up anything about the microphone, but Cease shared that on Heather Cox Richardson's show that
She was interviewing
Senator Angus King from Maine said that emails are more highly valued than calls and other methods of contacting them, and that if you can share a personal story or why it affects you, that's particularly moving for them. So Heather Cox Richardson is the one that was mentioned earlier as well. There's a question here. Who was it that was mentioned that you presents understandable, dependable information? So find her online.
Politicians want
Heather
votes.
Cox Richardson.
Heather Cox Richardson.
Also, if your representative, if you agree with what they're doing, tell them. Exactly. And so I listened to a talk by AOC, and she said she gets more, they keep track, and she gets daily. And she said she gets more calls from Republicans disagreeing with her. And so she said, it will help if the people who do agree say that, because she's not just getting the negative side.
So if you agree with what your senator has done, call and thank them. I want to get to a couple more questions. The executive doesn't have control over the budget, so how can the president reverse decisions made by Congress on the budget?
So there is the Impoundment Act, and so the argument is that the president executes what the budgetary decisions in Congress are, and that the president may have reason to hold something back. He or she has to contact Congress. There is a procedure, so Congress gets notice and can weigh in on that.
But so many people aren't getting their money. that they
Well, yes, no,
already spent.
and that's one of the things, that I mentioned how Judge McConnell said that the government is in contempt for not following through on the order to disperse funds. So, and the impoundment, this was coming with the Trump administration. It had been used before, and they're very much testing out this Impoundment Control Act. I think it'll get to the Supreme Court
But
at some point.
It seems a really evil thing that even if this is overturned, there's not going to be anyone to implement these budgetary things. There is no more State Department. There is no more USAID. So it's
Hopefully the Supreme Court will act quickly.
Yeah.
So any other questions you think of, please write them down, because unless we say them into the microphone, they won't go onto the video. One of the slides said that the Constitution, quote, protects individual rights and safeguards citizens against government overreach. But the Bill of Rights rarely mentions the word citizens. So could you please comment on the rights of non-citizens and whether the Constitution protects them? Beryl?
I'm just, this is one. Do you want to speak a little on this?
I'll try. Non-citizens have all the rights we have, and they have the right to be represented. They don't
Legal.
They don't have the right to an attorney. So that's why there's so much need for pro bono attorneys. But I don't know, I heard today that Trump thinks we should send some citizens, American citizens, to El Salvador too. So, I mean,
Yeah, the one thing I will say is the due process, if you're an alien, so-called, in American soil, you do have a right to due process. You don't have a right to vote. Even if you have a green card, you don't have a right to many, many things. And then also different states offer different rights. Some states offer education, some don't. So it's a kind of a grab bag. It's a tough question. Anyone else? Do you want to say?
The Bill of Rights does apply to everyone within the borders of the United States. There are some gray areas, like at the actual airport, you might not, people who are non-citizens don't quite have full rights in the airport. So there are some issues like that.
And people without a real ID.
Well, that's going to be the next.
Yes. Okay, is there a LWV endorsed action plan to oppose the voter suppression bill introduced by ISA? It's not a bill, it's a court case. So Daryl Issa filed the court case and the League of Women Voters of California has intervened. So I don't expect there to be any sort of action that we would be asking our members to call or email or anything on that particular one, but we'll definitely keep you posted.
Okay. Any others?
That's it.
Okay. Any other comments?
I just read a really, I'm subscribed to The Contrarian, and I just read a really good thing by Jennifer Rubin, who just said, stop waiting for a formal declaration of crisis. It's here, we're living through it. And, talk about read something in depth every day. I would suggest that you read that today, after when you go home.
Any other comments?
I'd just like to say one thing. It is really discouraging, it's really discouraging, it's disheartening, it's scary, but that's what they want, and we have to be like, yeah, so it's hard. Someone was talking about what fearless means. Fearless does not mean without fear. It means feeling fear and taking action. And I was joking with some people, I'm a very anxious person, I've been anxious my whole life, and I finally feel relaxed because I think there's actually something to be anxious about. So I feel like I've just been really prepared for this. But, I was telling some people earlier that Letitia James for the National Action Network spoke, and she's so powerful and so unafraid. Find those people who make you feel like we can do this. Because we can do this. We have to do this. And we will do this. So, I just want to say that.
I also think there are some very hopeful things, right? We just heard today that universities are now joining together and almost forming their own, like NATO, one for all for one. We're going to stand together. We have, Harvard standing up. I really think it's important for us to read and reread those hopeful articles and really be inspired by the people who are standing up.
And know that they're being rewarded for that. Harvard had donations go way up as soon as they stood up, and people who are normally, I don't want to say conservative, but David Brooks wrote a big article about it's time for everybody to get together. And there are more calls from action from all different types of people who, and that takes courage. Just saying that. So.
I think we should wrap up just because we've been at it for a while, but there's lots of opportunity to converse together. And we hope those of you who are new will show up at Zooms or in-persons, and we'll see more of you. So thank you for being such a good audience.
Yeah. And